giving you useful and practical tips to help you make more money selling travel. This is the Art of Selling Travel Podcast, and here to guide you through it all, your host, Glenda Beagle.
Well, hello there, and welcome back to another episode of the Art of Selling Travel Podcast. I am so happy to have you here, but more importantly, I am so happy to be able to talk about this. Because this is one of those conversations that travel advisors are so frustrated by all the time. And it ends up playing out in a number of different ways. But what we're talking about today is the clients that never seem to want to book. You've quoted, it's gone on and on and on, and nobody is wanting to book. What the heck? So here's a couple of things. One, we need to be tracking our conversion rate. We need to be looking at what's coming in. Every time we have somebody who gets curious, raises their hand, and wants to start going through the process, we need to know when they came in. We also, just chased a squirrel here for a second, we also need to know where they came from, because there's a lot of information that comes with that. Because if everybody who comes from one specific place turns into, a lack of a better term, a dud, then we know that we don't want to continue down that path, especially if you're having to financially support that particular avenue in terms of how your clients are coming to you. But the other thing is we also need to know what is closing, what's not closing, and how long it's taking. Because when we think, oh my goodness, this is taking forever, but then we look at how long it takes to close everything else, and you actually have a long close rate, that's something to be aware of as well, because it does change the perspective in that moment, but also as a whole. Now, I am not a proponent of having long close times. In fact, that is really and truly one of the things that we also want to work on. We want to shorten up the timeline that it takes to get your clients to close. But more than anything, and really the conversation we're having today, is how do we move people out of indecision and into making a decision? Some people will call that, how do you close the sale? Some people will call that, how do you get rid of micromanaging clients? You know, all these different sorts of things. Indecision, by its nature, is actually a form of a decision, because they're choosing not to make a decision, which means that they've made a decision. But yet, a lot of times, we look at it and they will say, I don't know, what else do you have? And instead of responding back with, tell me what's missing, a lot of times we then jump into, okay, let me see what else I can find. Let me see, there's got to be something else. Let me have a look. Let me do this. We instead need to take a moment and say, you know what? What's missing? What is it that you're still looking for that you haven't yet found? This is one of those big conversations that we talk about in Curious to Booked. This is a huge part of it, because let's be honest, nobody wants to work with indecisive clients. They are absolutely frustrating. So we need to look at what's the root cause of an indecisive client. Well, a lot of times it's because there was never an actual consultation. It's usually an email or a quick phone call, like just, hi, my name's Sally. I'm looking for a trip for 2 to Cancun. Can you price me out XYZ resort? Thanks, bye. You know, when we're competing on price, that's all they're going to keep looking for. But instead, when we take a moment to do that consultation, then we're able to establish a better idea of what they're looking for. We're also able to determine what is their point of compromise. Because if we don't know what their point of compromise is, heads up, it means they don't know either. So when they're looking at things, they don't know what to look at. And as a whole, when you're purchasing, I want you to think about when you're making a major purchase. Because whether we agree with it or not, or think of it in this way, we're talking about major purchases. And I mean like giant purchases. You might think, but it's only a couple thousand. Well, that trip might only be a couple thousand, might even be a couple of hundred, depending on what it is you're doing. But that doesn't mean it's only a couple thousand to somebody. It might be like, holy smokes, it's thousands. Our perception and theirs is different. Even if they're spending 10, 15, 20, 30, $40,000, we're talking about a significant purchase. We are also talking about a luxury purchase. Now, trip to Vegas, still for many people, that's a luxury trip because they don't have to go to Vegas. Now, if you happen to be listening to me from Vegas, no shade on, no shade on Vegas, but it is a part of the nature of it all. So our clients don't know what they don't know. And if we're not having the conversations with them, they don't know necessarily what to ask for. A lot of times when our clients don't make a decision, it's because they don't know how to make the decision. And I get it. On the surface, it looks like it would be so easy. It's like, it's yes or it's no. Here's my credit card or no. It sounds on the surface like it's so easy. But I promise you, nothing on the surface is ever easy. I want you to think back to a time when you felt dismissed by somebody, or like somebody they're like, whatever, move on, like, get over it. You're like, but no, I'm still in it. I'm still going through it. You don't like to feel dismissed or not seen, especially when you're making a large purchase. When I'm making large purchases, I don't always understand everything. I don't always understand what these different things mean. And by that, it can be a purchase as little as $50. And I'm not talking that that's a large purchase, but here's the scoop. If you don't understand what's all included or what's not included or what this, that, or the other is, we don't know if the value's there. And when we don't know what the value, whether or not it's worth what we're spending the money on, we don't want to spend the money. Have you ever, actually, I'm just trying to think here. There was an example. Oh, that's what it was. The other day, I was headed off to a women in business retreat. I forgot my toothbrush. Not cool. But I was driving past a drugstore on my way out of town, and I'm like, haha, I'm going to stop there. It'll just be easier. Well, here's the scoop. A couple days before, I had bought a toothbrush at a major box center, and it was a well-known brand that I bought, but I bought it for $1.97. I go into this drugstore. It's a national chain drugstore. I'm standing at the bank of toothbrushes, and at eye level, I saw $12.89, $18.69, like all of these big numbers. The cheapest one that I saw that was kind of in around the whole region of my eye level, the cheapest one was $6.49 for a freaking toothbrush. Now, is $6.49 going to break me? No. But $6.49 when I had just bought one for $1.97 just a couple days ago and then left on the counter at home, there wasn't value in it for me. There wasn't value in it for me to buy from that store when the box center was across the parking lot. Now, at the last minute, I did see one for $2.97 down on the bottom shelf. So I grabbed it because spending $1 more was worth it to me rather than going across the parking lot. Now, if I haven't lost you and you haven't rolled your eyes that I'm talking about toothbrushes, what I want you to understand, though, is that value is a perception. And if our clients don't see, if your clients don't see value in what it is that you're offering, they're not going to make a decision. Or the decision is they're not going to buy from you. See, here's the thing. I talk with a lot of advisors that say they just ghosted me. I didn't hear from them again. I don't know what it was. Like, obviously, they couldn't make up their mind. No, there was probably a whole lot of other things that went into that. One, did they buy it from somebody else? Two, did they understand what you gave them? All of these things that go through. The worst, of course, is when you have clients that you've gone back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and then they ghost and they're like, see, I knew they weren't serious. When I work with travel advisors inside Curious to Booked, we go over that because there are so many off ramps in that conversation where we could have taken them straight off and into the expressway to getting them booked. Because when people go back and forth, rarely, if ever, is the questions that they're asking actually the ones that are going to prevent them from buying. But yet we let that be the thing that we constantly chase. In fact, if I have a client over the years, thinking back, if I had a client that asked more than 2 questions, I went back and started the consultation over. It did not matter. I'd already quoted, did not matter how far we were in. I always stopped the conversation and said, you know what? Hold on. We need to go back. Let's start this over and just double check we're still on the right page. Because there's so many things that might have shifted. See, here's the thing. I remember seeing inside of a Facebook group, heck, it might even have been our Facebook group, but I remember a travel advisor saying that they don't do consultations. They went back to the form so that way, when a client says, no, I want this, they can shove that form back in their face, basically. I know that's not the words they used, but that's the client perspective of it, if you will. Shove it back in their face and say, see, look, you're the one that said this. There's so much that goes on in the process. This is not checking boxes. Sales, particularly in travel or anytime you're doing something big, is not check a box, check a box, check a box. There's so many other elements that come into it. There's so many conversations that have to be had. When I think back, and I would say my wedding couples were probably the biggest example of this. So while they didn't fill out a form, I did prepare them. The consultations would be long, but I did send them a list of questions for the two of them to have a conversation about, so that the first time they were having the conversation was not when they were sitting at my desk. Because I needed to make sure that they've already started that conversation. Because as people start to verbalize, things change. Heck, I was just telling you a moment ago how I went to this women in business retreat. Now, I was one of the organizers of this retreat, along with 2 others. We had a vision for what it was, but we also kept it very loose. And I was very, very specific that it needed to be, because we needed to be able to ebb and flow with how things went. Now, when I went into it, I knew I would not be sitting in the hot seat. I knew that I wasn't, quote unquote, there to work on my business. However, just my own personality, my own nature, I know that the more that I help other people with their businesses, the more things are going to shift in mine. I am back in my office today, and things that were not even on my radar when I left just 4 days ago are now on my radar. Not only on my radar, but now are on my priority. Why? Because through the course of conversation, through the course of verbalizing things, through the course of just having time to percolate and get excited about things and hearing other people's experiences, I went, oh, that's why this isn't working, because that's not what I should be working on. I should be putting this together. I should be working on this. This makes more sense. But see, if I went in to that conversation and I came out exactly the same person, then it was all for nothing. Now, we're chasing 2 different squirrels at the moment here. So let me kind of bring it back around. I was talking about those wedding couples. When they first start talking about what it is that they want, early on, I didn't used to send them that questionnaire to have a conversation. I was very specific. I don't want them filling it out and sending it back. It was a printout sheet, and it usually encouraged light a couple candles, open a bottle of wine, turn on a nice playlist, and just talk about this. Because it asked them, what do you vision your ceremony? Because inevitably I had them come into my office, they would sit down, and one would say this and one would say that, and they were not the same. So instead of them having that argument in front of me, going home, and arguments is probably not the right word all the time. It was some of the time, but probably not all of the time. But what it was is that it allowed them to have conversation. Because when they had it for the first time in front of me, almost every time I would get to work on putting together their quote. And then when I would start putting things together and I would get the proposal to them, they would be like, we were talking about it. And yeah, I know we said we really wanted that white sand beach, but we've decided we really want those sunset photos that the west coast of Mexico would give, or that we really want to be able to have everybody fly on the same day. So we want to, go to here, like all these different sorts of things. Well, that's not what I worked on. So I learned that by having better conversations, by being able to ask better questions and be able to go through all that, my ability to close went through the roof. And the amount of time it took to close shrunk dramatically. The other thing is when I was able to have those conversations, I was also able to start talking about the next trip and the next one and the next one and the next one. And I would know what their trip plans were for the next couple of years, all in that one conversation. When our clients don't feel seen and heard, they have no reason to trust you. If they don't feel like you understood them, if they feel like, this isn't even what I want. Now, keeping in mind, as I just said, things changed between when they did one and the other because we didn't have that full consultation, because we didn't have that full conversation to loop it all the way back around. Instead, the client goes, they just don't get me. Forget it. I can't be bothered. I'm having to do all this myself. The other problem is a lot of times what they ask for isn't even necessarily what they want. Now, if you're new to sales, you're probably like, then I'm out. Like, are you kidding me? What do you mean they don't even know what they want? Well, their ability to look for what they want, ask for what they want, all of that sort of thing is limited completely by what they know. It's that same story, and I know I've talked about it on other episodes with my parents when they wanted to go to Australia. And they were like, nope, not the right tour, not the right tour, not the right tour, not the right tour, not the right tour. And as it turned out, it was because of the people in the photos. They didn't feel like they would belong. But when I found them one, and lo and behold, it happened to be a luxury one where they flew on a private jet across Australia. My mom, I will never forget the day. She's like, oh, we can do this one. I have that shirt. People want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they'll be seen and heard. We don't know what it is that's making them object unless and until we have the relationship with them. We have to have that relationship set up with them so that we've earned the right to be able to ask those questions. Going into this retreat, if I went in and I did zero listening and did all of the talking, people would have tuned me out. Don't get me wrong. I fully admit I talk too much. I fully admit it. That's part of why I have a podcast, because I get to do a lot of talking there. Let's just be honest with that. But people that were there had to feel as though they were seen and heard. The really fun part was that when people believe they're seen and heard, because they were and are, that's when they start to tell you the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. And that's when everything starts to make sense. And so when somebody's saying, it's just not quite right, that's when you find out, I don't think I'm going to fit in. I don't think I belong. Unless we can get our clients to get to a point where they can verbalize that. Because otherwise, in the case of my parents, that's too much. That's too much. That's too much. That's too much. Lo and behold, the trip they ended up picking was almost double what any of the other trips were. Because they felt like they would belong. Indecisive clients come because they don't want to feel out of place. Indecisive clients come because they don't know what the solution is. They don't see the solution. They don't see the value that you're offering. We can't just tell people it's a great deal because then they're going to want to check the price. Instead, we have to reposition how we talk about things. We have to put it and make it about them, not about us. When we can reposition it into a conversation of, okay, so when I was going through, I chose this and this for you because you said, so that you can have. That has an entirely different feel to it than, here's the cheapest deal, or I know that deal's $200 more than something else, but here you go. We're not talking money. 9 times out of 10, when we are talking about sales, money is not the driver. And even probably more often than that, money is not the ultimate driver. Because people want to know that it's right for them. When I was talking about, we have the conversation with them and other such, then we send it to them and they're like, I don't know. No, I don't know. It's missing something. The reason why, if they asked more than 2 questions, and like two, and I'm not talking just about, okay, so what's our deposit? When is that? Like, I'm talking about real, like when you're getting that impression that they're wanting you to quote something entirely new. They've gotten excited. Once they've talked to you, they're probably going to start talking to their friends. And just like, oh, if you're going to that restaurant, you got to try this, you got to try that, everything else. We all want to give our friends good tips. It doesn't mean that they were given the right information. The other thing is, and this is my favorite, in one of our rounds of Curious to Booked, I remember working with one of the advisors, and she was talking about her clients. They were giving her pushback on the price for their Alaska cruise. And so she was asking me, like, how do I deal with this? How do I handle that? So I didn't just give her the answers. We coached her through it and we asked more questions. Okay, when was it? Did they go, like, where did they get their pricing from? Well, their friends went on an Alaska cruise. I said, great. When did their friends go? Well, they went, and I can't remember, I think it was like 2014 or 2015, something like that. I said, okay, so odds are good they booked that. If they went in 2014, they booked that probably 2013, or at the very least, they booked it in 2014. And this was a conversation we were having like in 2021 or 2022. I think it was, probably 2022. And so I was saying, like, we're talking a 7 to 8 year gap. What has the price of an automobile done in a 7 to 8 year gap? What is the price on local hotels done in the last 7 to 8 years? What is the price of your groceries done in the last 7 to 8 years? We need to dig deeper and we need to ask better questions, deeper questions, because otherwise we don't know what they're comparing it to. And when we don't know what they're comparing it to, so if we don't have the context for what it is that they're saying, we're not going to have anything by which to have that conversation with. I want you to think about it for a moment from the perspective of, well, that's just too much. Like, we have so many advisors. I see this in the Facebook groups, not so much in ours, but in so many of the others. I gave them this option, this option, this option. They all said it was too much. Who has something else that they can offer them? It's got to have the best beach. It's got to have the best this, best that. There's so many variables that go along with that, and so many questions that got missed. Just like when we go back to that Alaska cruise. So they're saying it costs too much. Instead of trying to find a quote unquote cheaper cruise, we instead need to ask where they're getting their pricing ideas from. Well, my friends said how much they paid. Great. Well, let's talk about what it is your friends booked. When did they book? If we're talking a 2-star cruise line to a 5-star cruise line, that's going to factor in. But also, too, back in 2014, I didn't want to say like 2013, 2014, I know that there was cruises to Alaska that had a base fare of $14 for a balcony. It was bananas. It was absolutely bananas for a while there. It seems kind of crazy in today's world to think about how Alaska was basically giving away the cruises, because that's sure not the experience of the last few years here. But there was a time when that was the case. So we need to make sure that we have the context, that we have the questions. And when we're going round and round, instead of continuing to go round and round and round, we have to stop that merry-go-round, and we have to let everybody have a chance to get off, reorientate themselves, and let's get ready to go again. When we have an indecisive client and we're not going through the steps to get everybody reoriented, get everybody all back on the same page, it often leads to ghosting. And I'm not just talking about ghosting from the client side. I also hear of a lot of advisors that quote unquote ghost their clients at that point. So it becomes one of those things that we want to make sure that we have the context, that we have all the pieces in place. This is a major part of the Curious to Booked program. And I am just going to talk about it for a quick moment. If you are listening to this episode the week it dropped, Curious to Booked is open, but only until Friday night. I had not planned on reopening it, but when I did last week's Facebook Live, I knew that the answer to that question, which was how to sell without sales experience, the answer was Curious to Booked. And we had closed enrollment just a couple weeks before. And I could not, in good conscience, gatekeep the answers. So I made the decision to open it up. And this will be the last time that it has all the fully jacked up bonuses that come with it, including fees, the fees experience, including the objections workshop. We're also doing a sales-based lead magnet workshop. That one's going to be a live virtual workshop coming up in just over a week. That's part of why we have to shut it down so that you get it, get in there. If you're interested, you can go to artofsellingtravel.com/curious. In the event you are listening to this later, it will then redirect to a wait list. And if you're listening to this months down the road, it's possible that it's reopened up. It won't have the bonuses that it had at the time of airing, but you can go to artofsellingtravel.com/curious to find out more information. If you're not already inside of our Facebook group, come on over, hang out with us there. We do Facebook Lives on a fairly regular basis. So we invite you to come and join us with that. You do have to answer the questions, come inside the group. But just to kind of wrap this up, I want to just remind you that an indecisive client is a client that's missing data, that's missing that thing that's going to make them say, hell yes. And if our clients can't feel comfortable and excited to say yes, then they're not going to spend the money that's needed to be spent in order to experience these vacations. It is our job as a travel professional, a travel advisor, a travel consultant, a travel agent, however you identify your name, your title. I want you to know You're in sales. It is your job to give them the value, to show them the value, to demonstrate to them the value of what they're purchasing. We never want it to be based on price. As Nolan Burris used to say, how cheap does a bad vacation have to be to have still been a good deal? I have done that uber cheap vacation. And I am here today to tell you there is not enough money in the world that you could pay me to repeat that vacation. Trust me, it is not worth it to be focused entirely on price if you care about your clients. I absolutely understand that there are budget restrictions for some clients. I absolutely believe that there are clients who think that the only thing that's important is money. But that's not why they called you. Because even when they say, I need you to find me a really good deal, the question instead needs to be, not a problem. I just need to know, are you looking for the cheapest vacation or are you looking for the best value? Because if it's strictly the cheapest vacation, I'm not your girl or your guy or whoever you are. Because I want to make sure you have the best possible experience, not just the cheapest vacation. I want you to think about this. If you had a client that was going to have a miserable time, and I get it, you're not intentionally setting out to set people up for a miserable vacation. But what if for an extra $100 a person, they actually got an entirely different experience? Would that be worth it to you to have that conversation with your client? See, when we put our client first, above money, above budget, above all of those things, and put the experience that they're going to have above everything else, it becomes a game changer. It becomes what sets your clients up for success. And I define success in travel as clients coming back raving about the memories that they made for the good reasons, not the bad, and having had an absolutely wonderful experience. Until next time, happy selling, and we'll see you in the Facebook group.